This is a video with more details about biomolecules, which are these large organic molecules that are synthesized by our cells. Remember that you are responsible for knowing the details about biomolecules that is in the lecture notes, and I will go over all that material here in this video. So there's 4 different types of biomolecules. There's carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So we'll go through those 4 in that order. So for carbohydrates, these are also known as sugars or saccharides. And in the top left here, we have what's known as monosaccharides. Monosaccharide. So 2 examples are shown here, glucose and fructose, but there are a lot of other examples. Note that these monosaccharides are made up of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And there's enough oxygens here that this is a polar molecule, so it is hydrophilic. Okay, so carbohydrates are hydrophilic. In other words, they can form hydrogen bonds with water. If you have 2 monosaccharides that are bound together through a covalent bond, then these are known as disaccharides. And we have 2 examples over here, sucrose and lactose. Okay, so these are just, again, a sugar that's made up of 2 monosaccharides. And then finally, you can have many of these monosaccharides binding together via covalent bonds to form what's known as a polysaccharide, which is shown here. There's a couple of different examples of these. One of the common polysaccharides in our body is glycogen. Glycogen is made up only of glucose, and it's one of the ways that our body stores carbohydrates for later use. So carbohydrates are primarily used in our bodies for energy. We break them down and we can use that energy to make ATP. Carbohydrates are also put onto lipids and proteins, especially in the membrane, and these are used to signal between cells. So it's how the cells recognize each other. Okay, so this is our second category. These are called lipids. The defining characteristic of lipids is that they are hydrophobic. Okay, so that means that they don't interact well with water, and in fact, they like other fats instead. So there are a couple of different types of lipids, and some of them do look different from each other. So let's look at the one at the top here. This is called a triglyceride. It is made up of 3 fatty acids. So this chain here, which has all of these carbons and hydrogens, is known as a fatty acid. And so 3 of these are bound together via a molecule over here on the left, which is known as glycerol. Okay, so even though there are some oxygens in the glycerol component in the beginning of the fatty acids, there's just so many carbons and hydrogens in the fatty acids that it gives this molecule a hydrophobic nature. And triglycerides are basically fats. That's how we store fat in the body. And these are also used as an energy source to make ATP. There are other types of lipids, and these are shown on the bottom here. So they are based on a molecule called cholesterol, shown here. And cholesterol is also found in the plasma membrane and has various functions in our body. Note that whenever there is a point here in this circle, that means it's a carbon just binding to as many hydrogens as it can. Okay, so this is actually a carbon here, and then it'd be bound to a hydrogen, and another hydrogen there. And then this is another carbon, bound to hydrogen and hydrogen. So in other words, all of these rings here are carbon and hydrogen and are therefore non-polar. And so cholesterol does have one little oxygen on the side, but it's not enough. And so this molecule is hydrophobic. And then also note, there is another molecule here called testosterone, and testosterone is actually made from cholesterol. And testosterone is a steroid hormone, and there's other types of steroid hormones. And these are all lipids. Okay, so that's another major function of lipids, is that they can act as hormones, besides just being used for energy. Okay, there's a kind of special class of lipid, which is known as a phospholipid. It is also made of fatty acids. It has 2 of them, as you can see here. And then these fatty acids are bound to glycerol, and instead of having a 3rd fatty acid, instead we have this group here where there's a phosphate group, there's oxygens, there's a nitrogen, it's charged. And so this is hydrophilic, as it says here, hydrophilic and polar. We call this the head of the phospholipid. And then the tail are these fatty acid chains, which are nonpolar. So the phospholipids kind of have a dual nature. They are both polar in the head and then nonpolar in the tail. And so this gets a special term. It's called amphiphilic, as shown here. So this is a molecule that is both polar and nonpolar. And we'll see that phospholipids are really important for making the plasma membrane. And the fact that they're amphiphilic gives it the membrane a lot of interesting and unique properties. Okay, so our third category is proteins, and proteins are made from amino acids. This is an amino acid shown here. So it has some oxygens, it has a nitrogen, and so this is definitely polar. Okay, so amino acids are polar and therefore hydrophilic. Note also that there is this R group shown here. And so the R group can just be anything. There's 20 essential main amino acids, and they all have different types of chemicals found in this R group. So it could just be like a carbon, or it could be something that's charged. It could be an oxygen. And so the different types of R groups will give different properties to the proteins that are made up of those amino acids. So this diagram here on the top shows amino acids connected to each other, right? And so this is how proteins are made. The amino acids are connected in a linear chain, and then the proteins, once they are formed, will often fold up into these complicated three-dimensional structures, as you can see down here. There are these things called alpha helices and beta sheets. You don't really need to worry about those. Just know that proteins fold into these unique shapes, and that's what gives the proteins their own unique properties and functions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more throughout the semester. Proteins have lots of different functions inside of cells. As we heard about in class, they're used as enzymes to help catalyze chemical reactions. They are also providing structural support for the cells. They help move molecules across membranes. They are chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, hormones. They also act as receptors to receive those messages. So we'll be hearing a lot more about proteins in this class. So nucleotides, that's our fourth group here. Nucleotide is the monomer, which is used to make nucleic acids. Okay, so this is the monomer. And let's look at what a nucleotide is made up out of. So it has a sugar, so a carbohydrate, which you can see here. This is either ribose or deoxyribose. You don't really need to worry about the structure or anything. Just know that it has a sugar. And then it also has a phosphate group shown here. So this is very polar and it has charges on it. And then it has what's known as a base, which is just a ring with carbons and nitrogens. So nucleotides are charged, and they're definitely very polar. So this is absolutely hydrophilic. Okay, so it can interact well with water. Okay, so that's the nucleotide. One really important nucleotide is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So here again is the nitrogenous base shown here. It has nitrogens and a bunch of carbons. And then here's the sugar shown here. And then here, instead of one phosphate, it actually has three. So 1, 2, 3. Okay? And so ATP is used to store energy from breaking down glucose and fats. And in particular, we break off this last phosphate when we need energy. And breaking that bond gives energy that is used to drive other chemical reactions. Okay, and then of course, a really important nucleic acid is DNA and then also RNA. So these are, again, made out of nucleotides. You don't need to worry too much about the structure here. We're not going to talk much about DNA and RNA in this class. But just know that DNA shown here is double-stranded, and the ACTGs you've probably heard of before are the abbreviations for the different bases, right? So these are those nitrogenous bases that we saw. Here are the sugars, and then here's the phosphate. And so it's just a bunch of nucleotides connected together in two linear chains, and they form these hydrogen bonds in between each other. And then shown over on the right side is RNA, and RNA is just a single strand of all those nucleotides connected together. And we know that DNA is used to store genetic information, and RNA is important for making proteins.